Welcome to the TechLink Health Podcast, an on-demand source for the top trending healthcare topics and insights. Delivered by key opinion and emerging leaders and as featured on the TechLink Health app. The healthcare industry is rapidly evolving, so our goal is to connect listeners to the most relevant insights, ranging from digital health to financial well-being to interesting side gigs. For more details, visit www.techlink.health.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to the TechLink Health Podcast. I am Justine Reist, your host, and I will be co-hosting this episode with David Sanchez, RN, who has also been a guest and a host on this podcast. So nice to see you again, David. Now, as many continue to evolve toward health and wellness transformations, it's helpful to share best practices in this space. And this episode is taking a deep look into time-tested practices of healing, educating, and empowering people to achieve optimal health and well-being. This episode's guest we are welcoming today is Dr. Sarah Samaan, a retired cardiologist of over 27 years. And she doesn't look like she should be retiring. I just want to say that. You can't see her, but I can. She was inspired by the question and curiosity of her patients and the realization that there was a compelling need for sound, well-researched, and accessible information about diet and heart health, which then motivated her to dive deeper into this perspective with a laser focus and eventually led to her authoring 3 critically acclaimed books on heart health. That is so impressive, Dr. Samaan, starting with the Smart Woman's Guide to Heart Health, which won Forbes magazine's Bronze Award in 2009 for women's issues. In 2012, she wrote Best Practices for a Healthy Heart, How to Stop Heart Disease Before and After It Starts, published by The Experiment. And as a recognized authority in the field of heart health and prevention, in 2014, she was asked to co-author Dash Diet for Dummies. That is a great name. Dash Diet for Dummies, I had to say it again, with dietitians Roseanne Rust and Cindy Kleckner. A second edition of the book was published in 2020. Wow, that's awesome. As a way of continuing her commitment to providing sound, accessible, and evidence-based healthcare information, she currently serves as a medical writer for GoodRx.com, and she is also an OpMed fellow for the medical website Doximity. Complementary to her work in the medical profession as a registered yoga teacher, she runs an online studio, windingroadyoga.com, with a focus on yoga for healers. She's particularly interested in yin yoga and has studied under Bernie Clark, achieving yin yoga teacher certification. So exciting. I can't wait to hear all about all of this. In addition, she is a healthcare peer coaching practitioner and a certified mindfulness coach. And she recently achieved certification in time management coaching, something I think we all struggle with, especially when you're as busy as you are, Sarah. During her work, Dr. Samaan has been quoted in many national magazines and online resources, including Prevention Magazine, Consumer Reports, Shape, Fitness Magazine, and Forbes, among others. It goes without saying that Dr. Samaan has a passion for influencing healthy habits and helping people to further evolve in the wellness journey, and we look forward to hearing her perspectives. So we are so excited to welcome you, Dr. Samaan, to the podcast. Dr. Samaan, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Justine.
You're so welcome. So now we need to hear from your own words to give us a little background and take some time to introduce yourself, not necessarily in more detail, but maybe the things that really stand out to you about your journey into clinical practice. And then as an influencer in the mindfulness space, as an author, I mean, there's so much here that you have done in your life. So break it down for us in your own words.
Great. Well, I'm excited to be here and give you a little bit about my background. I graduated from medical school at Vanderbilt in 1988 when times were very different in healthcare. Did my internal medicine residency at the University of California, Irvine, and my fellowship at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque. I was on faculty there and then moved on to the Dallas-Fort Worth area to begin in private practice in 1995. I was fortunate enough to be one of the original physician partners at the Heart Hospital Baylor Plano, which is a tertiary care cardiovascular hospital. So, as a cardiologist, I cared for adult patients with the gamut of cardiovascular disease, ranging from the very straightforward, basic preventive care to extremely complex cardiovascular disease. And one of the things that was such a gift about being a cardiologist was the ability to care for a broad range of people of pretty much every socioeconomic, racial, ethnic background that you can imagine. And that really was a privilege to be part of so many different lives. And also to be part of a team of cardiologists, other physicians, nurses, others that practice in the healthcare field, and to be part of a really amazing group of people, all of us focused on helping people get better, get stronger, get back to an independent life. So, what I realized over time, one of the things that came up again and again was how can we prevent these problems in the first place? Because we see devastating disease in cardiology, and so much of it is preventable. And so that's what led to a lot of my interests and my other endeavors, like my books. People just really wanted to know what to eat. Do they need supplements? How do they exercise? How to maintain a healthy weight? And all of these things are what drove me towards my focus on prevention.
Right. And you don't want to wait until the heart attack happens or heart disease takes evidence, in your body to start doing those things. So was there a moment in your practice where you started to see maybe some trends of things that were happening or family members that were reacting a certain way or people? What were you seeing? And was there a moment where you started seeing a lot of things that made you go, okay, we got to do something different here and maybe I can help?
Yeah, well, I come from a family of heart disease. My paternal grandmother died at the age of 48 of a heart attack, and most of my father's siblings died early from cardiovascular disease. My father had a stroke at 62, right as I was applying for cardiology fellowship programs. So I think that heart disease kind of was a shadow over my life, whether I realized it or not. Growing up, there was always somebody who was suffering or had died or was experiencing health problems, especially on my father's side. And I saw these things in my patients as well. And a lot of times they were people that freely admitted their lifestyle could have been healthier or they were older and this was not an unexpected thing. But there were definitely situations where it wasn't an expected event, or perhaps the individual experiencing the heart disease didn't realize that there might have been things that they could have done or could have been more aware of or could have paid more attention to that if addressed early on could have ultimately prevented the heart attack. So a lot of times in prevention, we're dealing with delayed gratification. We never know that we prevented the heart attack. They just don't have it. And we're looking at the scale of years or even decades. So that's what makes the prevention side of heart disease so challenging.
That's really interesting that you were able to sort of backtrack and help people along the way with the books that you came out with. We're going to talk about those a little bit. I know David has a question he's dying
Yeah,
to ask.
that's really interesting to me because I worked for a number of years in the emergency department, and you see different types of patients, different types of personalities, different family dynamics that seem to correlate in kind of like spectrums with certain diseases. So, as a cardiologist, did you see certain emotional or spiritual patterns or factors involved with cardiac patients?
Well, heart disease can affect anybody across the spectrum, but definitely there was that group or that tendency towards the type A, the kind of intense personality. And I think a lot of times, too, that's the personality that might be more likely to overlook things that get in their way, that might be more likely to write something off or try to push through something that doesn't feel right because they want to be in control. And wanting to be in control of your life is certainly an understandable and laudable feature, but it can certainly get in our way as well when we don't know to reach out for help before something bad happens. So, as you know from working in the emergency room, sometimes it's too late to reverse the problem. If someone gets into the hospital as their heart attack is starting within the first 6, 8 hours, often we can reverse it. But if you wait and ignore the symptoms, that's when things really can go downhill and get to a point of, I don't want to say no return because usually there's something we can do, but we want to prevent that permanent damage. We want to empower people to live as healthy and active and rewarding a life as possible. And part of that is taking charge of your health before something happens.
So what would you say to somebody who might fit in that category?
Well, first of all, I think when we talk about the really top things that you can do to prevent a heart attack, first of all, and this is something that might appeal to somebody who's more of a type A, is know your numbers, get the facts. Don't just try to guess at it. Don't pretend it's not there. Get the numbers, know your blood pressure, your cholesterol, your blood sugar. If you have those three pieces of information, that's a great deal of preventive care. So these are three simple pieces of information you can get at any visit with your doctor, your nurse, your PA, your nurse practitioner at a health fair. Really, really easy. What's your blood pressure? What's your cholesterol? And you want to know the breakdown of that, which most labs will show you the good and the bad cholesterol. And what's your blood sugar? Are you diabetic or not? Because a lot of people with diabetes don't know they have it. For example, my father, he was an endocrinologist. He was actually the head of endocrinology at a leading hospital, and he had no idea he was diabetic until he had a stroke at 62. So, yeah, and it led to kidney failure, heart failure, and the strokes. So, these are things that can clearly be measured, and we have such good treatment. There's no reason to be afraid of this. Just know your numbers and then move forward. So that was point number one. The other two things that are simple, sound simple, take a little bit more effort. Exercise, at least ideally 2.5 hours a week, which can be 30 minutes, 5 days a week. But if you only do 15 minutes, you're still going to get something out of it. And eat right, more of a plant-based diet, cutting back on the red meat, choosing a more natural diet, staying away from the processed foods. So those are really simple things. They're really basic. You hear those over and over, but they really make a difference. So doing those things and not smoking can lower your risk of a heart attack by 70%.
Oh, that's great. That's excellent. When I was 23 years old, I was at a health fair. I was a new nurse and I've been a nurse for a year. And we decided to test each other with the rapid glucose and cholesterol test. And I found out I had high cholesterol at age 23. And a nurse practitioner from the company I worked for said, it's probably genetic. And yeah, a lot in my family has diabetes and heart disease. And so from there, I took a lot of the steps that you mentioned. One of them involved stressing less, not worrying about a lot of details as much, and shifting to a more natural diet. And I was pretty fit. I've always played sports, but taking it a little more seriously and regularly. And that did turn around within a few years.
It's fantastic.
But I appreciate that. That's really great to know for everybody. That was great. I do want to ask another question. You mentioned that you're certified in time management coaching, which we can all use some improvement in time management. So I had a question about that. So let's talk about the balance that's necessary to be involved in a lot of different things, which obviously has been the case for you. And also one of the premises besides TechLink Health, the ability for healthcare professionals to do a lot of different things that line up with their interests. So it'd be really great to hear your perspective. What are some best practices for balancing the complexities of clinical practice with passion projects or side gigs?
Yeah. So I think that it's really important from so many standpoints for physicians and others in healthcare and other complicated professions to find a balance. And time management is part of that because it's very easy to waste time. And when you're busy, your time is limited. But if you do a time tracking exercise just for a week or so, you may find that there's parts or times of your life where you're wasting time, maybe scrolling the internet, maybe just watching TV that isn't really meaningful to you. And using those bits of time to pursue something that is really meaningful to you can enrich your life in so many different ways. First of all, I think having to learn something new, finding something that excites you and having to learn something new puts you in that beginner's mindset, which is such a wonderful place to be when you're somebody with a lot of responsibility. Having something that you're passionate about that you're not expected to know everything about, I think is a wonderful way to kind of pursue interests that can lead to something else. So if you start from a beginner's mindset, you're going to learn. You're not going to be a beginner forever. But if you allow yourself that time and space to not know everything and not be perfect at what you do, you'll give yourself a chance to grow in ways that you might not have expected.
Just really on that note, Sarah, that is something that is so hard for people to really grasp because our desire is so strong for us to be good at something right away. I run into this a lot when I talk to people about getting into the space of voiceover. They want to be good at it right away, but that's why you're entering a coaching program so that you can learn and see the progress, not the perfection, and sort of embrace that inner critic. And I think some of the other things you're about to talk about help you get into the beginner's mindset. It's not just like snap my fingers and I do it. I mean, if you can, awesome. That's the goal. I think that's just worth pointing out that that's worth working at, getting the beginner's mindset.
Yeah, I really thought that was interesting that you mentioned that because physicians in particular, they're under a lot of pressure to get things right. There's some serious implications if they make mistakes, but they are human. Do you think the dynamics are different for physicians to go into that mind?
I think it's a hard place for some people to be. We are expected to have the answers. We're expected to have the answers right away. And I think it can be hard for somebody to shut that off at the end of the day and allow themselves to be guided, to let go of that perfectionism. But being more open to something new will help keep your mind open and more flexible. And I'm a big believer in connecting the dots, and finding new connections between things. So if you are continually immersed in the medical field or whatever professional field you're in, you're exposed to a lot of great information, great people. You're going to grow in that direction, but you may not grow in other directions. And when you get exposed to different ideas, different people, different experts, who are outside of your field, you start building more dots that you can over time connect and make something out of. And, for example, you spoke about side gigs. How do you find a side gig? Well, for the most part, you want to make yourself more broad based, have more ideas, have more interests that you can combine in a way that makes a project something you're really passionate about and not just something you're doing because you need to or you want to make more money.
Yeah, that's good. So did that play a role in you retiring early and exploring other opportunities?
I think so. I have always had an interest in the arts, and I'm actually currently enrolled in a Bachelor's of Fine Arts degree program. I hope to eventually pursue a master's, perhaps do some teaching in the future. But I did set a goal many years ago when 59 sounded really old. I set a goal to have that opportunity to retire at that age because I did see that there were other areas of life that I just literally didn't have the time to pursue to the same degree that I wanted to. So I stayed involved in those things. I was active in my community and in organizations around the arts, for example. There's other things that I do as well. I'm happy to talk about. But as far as that opportunity, I had that goal in mind. And from a time management standpoint, I kind of learned to make that big goal into small goals because I think that's what you really have to do to reach a big goal that sounds unobtainable is to break it down into teeny tiny parts. And so over the years, I kind of built up slowly to a point where I felt confident making that leap. And that may not be what's right for everybody, but for me, choosing to set that goal and then not just have it as a goal, but finding little steps that allowed me to reach the goal in the time frame that I wanted, actually worked for me.
What are you hoping to do with your fine arts degree? Because the goal probably wasn't just the fine arts degree, but it was something to get after the fine arts degree. So what is that?
Well, it's interesting because it does kind of combine a lot of the things I'm interested in. I'd like to get a master's degree for a number of reasons, from the standpoint of just really cementing an artistic practice, feeling really confident, having the background and just the space to develop artistically. But I have an idea in the long run that I would really like to teach the humanities to people in healthcare, to medical students, to others that are in training, and even people in practice if there's a place for that. I think healthcare is evolving, but we're really understanding more and more the place for mindfulness and understanding artistic expression and how that can inform our healthcare. And so, this idea of combining art and teaching with mindfulness is something that has developed organically for me, but I think it's something that is really needed these days in healthcare to be able to understand and connect with people in a deeper way.
I think that's so true. My father was a radiologist and a pianist, and he retired at 55 to play his piano more. And I've seen a lot of medical practitioners have artistic outlets, painters, very studied writers. And I think they really go hand in hand. People that think they're not creative, I just do this, I'm not creative. We all have that creative juice. And I think, at least I've seen, I love your opinion, when you start to live creatively on some level of your life, that other thing that you're doing that's maybe more clinical or more logical, you can do in a different way and with more joy. Do you think that that's true?
I absolutely do. I think that when you do have a way to express or grow that creative side of you, no matter what it is, for me, it's photography. I also write, but from an artistic standpoint, photography, it really creates sort of a meditative state and a mindfulness. And in learning this and understanding more about it, and also in pursuing yoga, it allowed me to understand things that make other people unique and to be able to make connections with a wide variety of people on a deeper level. I think that the arts in particular is so important because it shows you that there are different perspectives for understanding the world and that our own perspective is not the only perspective.
That's so great. I'm going to jump back to your books. They've reached critical acclaim. It's very impressive that you've authored 3 books. Can you walk us through that journey a little bit and maybe even summarize the themes of the books, if there's a through line between the 3 of them or if they were 3 totally different perspectives?
Yeah, my books are all about getting healthy and staying healthy. And in all of them, I try to break down the science behind what works and what doesn't in terms that are easily understandable and relevant to just the everyday person who's not in healthcare. And I also try to break through the myths and misperceptions that can actually hold people back. So over the years, there's unfortunately more misinformation, misunderstanding of what's healthy, what's not healthy, what can make a difference and what can't. And so I really wanted to offer that information to people in a way that made sense. So in best practices, which evolved from my first book, The Smart Woman's Guide to Heart Health, I wanted to include men into that book. Probably in my practice, I would say maybe 60% of my patients were women, 40% were men. So I cared for a lot of men and I didn't want to leave them out. So, the themes through all the books are diet, exercise, knowing your numbers, but also things like stress and how stress can affect your health, how hormones can affect your health, and less conventional ideas that are meaningful and important and actually well researched, like meditation and sleep and making connections with other people.
I mean, the sleep
Wow,
thing,
that's
and
really
we've talked
interesting.
so
Can you
much
go a
about.
little bit more
Yeah.
into those?
I think we were both excited about sleep, talking about sleep, and we've talked a lot about on the podcast about sleep and meditation.
I'm always excited about sleep. I'm the master of the power nap.
You are? See, that's the thing that I need to get better at or find more time in. I went to the chiropractor today and we were talking about sleep and these technologies that we've talked about on the podcast before, like Whoop, but certainly, I think we have sort of an epidemic, a sleep crisis that is a big problem and that will lead to a lot of stress. And I'm only recently putting together how important that is to get the good night's sleep to actually be able to manage my day. And that my meditation practice almost needs to start at night, really. And the consistency, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on the consistency of meditation and all these things and exercise and that just the consistency and the routine of it.
Yeah, sleep is such a huge problem. Of course, there's sleep apnea, which is generally caused by physical illness. And that's something that is a medical concern that needs to be dealt with. But the other types of sleep disorders are at least equally common, if not more so. And a lot of it is driven by stress. Your mind just never stops worrying. And that's where mindfulness can really make a difference. But also, our screen time, we're just glued to the screen, and we know that that blue light from the computer tricks your brain into thinking it's daylight, and that's unfortunately such an epidemic problem in our society, probably around the world, and unfortunately in children as well, such a common issue, and it's truly a lifestyle that most of us are living right now. So being able to disconnect and give yourself that time at the end of the day is so critical. When it comes to sleep, there are several things that you can do that really will make a difference. Now, I'm going to back up and say, as a cardiologist, being on call messed up my sleep, and there was just no way around it. And, I would be on call sometimes on the weekends for 3 days straight. There's that whole kind of stress, like continual level of alertness that, you have to override. And the same with people who work in the emergency rooms. When your sleep is that disordered, it's really, really hard to get to a normal kind of rhythm. And so I don't have the answer to that, unfortunately, but there are other things that you can do that will really help to settle things down at the end of the day. And one is, and this is becoming more common as a recommendation, is just turn off the computer, turn off your phone, or set it aside if you possibly can an hour before bedtime. I think the experts would tell you several hours before that might not be practical, but if you can do it at least an hour before bedtime, and then make a little bit of time at the end of the day to plan your next day. Make a list of what you want to do. Make a list of the things that you've done and reflect on that. Maybe even use that time for journaling. And those are things that over time will increase your mindfulness capacity, improve your productivity, and also help you to get to sleep better. So that's a really important thing if you can take that last hour, even 30 minutes at the end of the day to reflect and just allow your body to slow down. The other thing that's important is if you do exercise, you'll probably sleep better. You don't have to exercise at night. Most people shouldn't exercise too late at night, but regular exercise will give you a better
Maybe
quality of
yoga
sleep.
later at night.
And yoga, absolutely. So yoga is one of my passions. And there's different kinds of yoga. If you want to do something really strenuous, you might do that earlier in the day. For me, that meant doing yoga at 7:30 at night when I was working, going to a 7:30 class before COVID. Some people like to work out at 5 in the morning. That's great. And sometimes, actually, to be honest, I would just do yin yoga late at night, and it was fine because that's more of a slowing down type of process.
Yeah, I'm one of those 5 o'clock in the morning workout persons.
That's fantastic. I'm in awe.
Yeah. No, that's just, I think that's more my circadian rhythm, I think. So I had a question about mindfulness. Do you see a parallel or some commonalities between mindfulness and prayer or other types of practices like that?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. And that's actually been looked at as far as reducing stress hormones. So there's a really strong similarity in the way the body responds to meditation and prayer and chanting, something that is more of on the spiritual side. So for different people, that's going to be a different way of experiencing spirituality. But spirituality itself, having a spiritual practice, is actually associated with a lower risk of heart disease, lower blood pressure, lower stress hormones, and in a lot of cases, better quality of sleep, better quality of connections with other people.
We have a question here about during the pandemic and the strain on global health that I think is so much about all these things that we're talking about, because we lost the connection with our friends and families and we had to learn to live in this isolated way. And how did you see the industry from your perspective as you kind of were going through your own transition? Because you really ended up in the retirement sort of just recently, 7 months ago, I think you said. So, how do you think healthcare can really help us transition and heal towards the future?
Yeah, that's an important question. I worked through the pandemic, the first 2 years of the pandemic, and we were already seeing changes in the way healthcare was delivered, the way that healthcare workload was changing, and in the way interactions with patients were changing. And I think that the pandemic accelerated that. And so, unfortunately, as a result of that, burnout levels have nearly doubled compared to what we saw before 2020 in physicians, and I'm sure in other people in healthcare as well. So, we're seeing people, some doctors retiring early, doctors planning to retire early. We're seeing nurses leaving clinical practice, maybe going into other areas of healthcare or changing professions altogether. We're finding it harder to get support staff. And a lot of that is related to this burnout that so many of us experienced over the last few years. And, it affected everybody. Of course, our patients suffered, as all of us did. And so I'm certainly not minimizing the effect that the pandemic had on other people. But from my perspective as a cardiologist and someone who had been in healthcare as a physician since 1988, starting medical school in 1984. Really, the last few years has been extremely tumultuous for people in healthcare, much more so than ever in the past. And there was a study back in 2018 looking at, even before the pandemic, what were the causes of burnout and lack of support, workload, lack of respect, documentation, and then problems with work life balance. So, those were the 5 things that were affecting physicians who were part of this study. And that was before the pandemic. So, since the pandemic, these things have only accelerated. And so the system has to change. It's easy to say, well, you doctors have to change. You doctors and nurses need to be more mindful, but it's the system that has to change.
I couldn't agree more, honestly. I worked full time through the pandemic also in the emergency department the first 2 years. And I think I transitioned out of clinical work around the same time you did. And I couldn't agree more. I would say, I think maybe 1 or 2 people that I worked with at that time that are even still in the same department. It could be a transition to something maybe less stressful or just out of clinical practice altogether. Lots of different changes. Yeah, I agree. So, as a certified mindfulness coach, it'd be really interesting to connect the dots, like you mentioned, the different areas of interest. So, what have you learned from your mindfulness practice that you may not have learned in your clinical training?
Yeah. Well, I'll kind of give you a little background as to how I got to a mindfulness practice because it was kind of unexpected. It was by accident, literally. So I've always been active. I ride horses. And around 1998 or so, I had a bad riding accident where I broke my arm. And at that point, I was shocked, that I was breakable. I had never been a patient in the emergency room before, and all of a sudden now I was a patient. So that was a real shock to my system. But I realized at that time as a writer that I needed a better connection between my mind and my body. And that was before people were using that term mind body connection. But I kind of understood that that connection was going to be important if I wanted to continue moving forward and advancing because I compete and also would allow me to connect more completely with my horse. And so that led me to yoga, which I chose as more of a kind of a physical process, but it really changed my life. And I found that the mind body connection was extremely powerful. And I didn't expect that. I wasn't looking for that, but I found that. And I had extremely good yoga teachers. There weren't very many around. So I had to travel quite a distance to get to a yoga class. And after about 6 months of doing yoga regularly, I became aware that I was using the same breathing techniques to slow down my thoughts and regulate my stress and deal more calmly with complicated situations and difficult patient visits. And I still remember, noticing that and kind of really being surprised, like, oh, I'm doing this breathing and it's really making a difference. And it wasn't even something I talked about with my colleagues because it was kind of like they would have I thought they would have thought that that was kinda out there, but I think that it really informed my practice of cardiology, changed me in a good way as a more compassionate person, and just took me down that path of trying to understand more about how being mindful and being connected to other people in the moment could really make a difference in their care and in my experience of being a physician.
I think that is so great because sometimes people say, I can't meditate. I'm sure you've heard that. I can't, because we don't realize that it can be quite simple, or certainly can start with a few deep breaths and, 4 in, hold for 4, out for 4. And that's how you start meditating. And it's not necessarily about eliminate your thoughts, it's about learning to bring your thoughts back, and grounding to breath is a great way to do that for anybody doing anything. And it will certainly help you connect more to the moment and turn that worry possibly into prayer or something more internal. Have you guys heard that? If you worry, why pray? If you pray, why worry?
I haven't. That sounds good.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
That's very good.
Well, Dave, do you have some things that we did not touch on? It's been such a great, incredible conversation that could lead to so many different places.
Yeah, I could ask you a million questions, I think. I'll just throw in one or two more just because it interests me. What role do you think technology plays in mindfulness?
Yeah, we're so fortunate right now to have such access to different ways to experience mindfulness through our phones. It's incredible the opportunities and the options that are out there. So I think technology is a great way to access mindfulness and gives you kind of an easy way to just check in, and just spend a few minutes. So mindfulness and meditation aren't necessarily the same, but mindfulness meditation is the way that I like to meditate, and it's just paying attention, being in the present moment, not judging myself, not judging others, just taking that moment, those few breaths to recenter. So I've benefited a lot from being part of an online mindfulness community. And I can certainly recommend a couple of apps for you, for the listeners, if you'd like to hear my recommendations. So Insight Timer has just a wide range of different meditations, different teachers. It's easy to access. And then if you're looking for an app that's going to help you go deeper and really learn more about mindfulness, I like the Waking Up app by Sam Harris. It's just a wonderful program that really takes you through step by step what mindfulness is and through a little course. And then there's a lot of other kind of people and talks and meditations that you have access to with that app. So those are the two that I use. Headspace is also good. A lot of people like Calm, and I think those two in particular are sometimes available at low cost or no cost with some healthcare systems.
Yeah, those are great. We are certainly not in a shortage. And so there's no excuse to not start to learn about this. It's very, very simple. And I think it can help our overall health. So it's really wonderful. So, in closing, as you've already given us some advice about apps, ways to connect to your work, and the latest health, wellness, and mindfulness, any book recommendations or any other practical recommendations that have been influential to you and can more broadly help all of us achieve greater level of health and wellness?
Yeah, so I'll give you a couple of book recommendations. First of all, from a very practical standpoint, but very actionable, easy to access, the bullet journal book can be life changing. It really helps you to organize your life for the better and give you a process for discovering what is important to you. So I just really can't recommend that highly enough. It's an excellent book, the bullet journal book. I bullet journal. I tried different time management tools, and this is what really works for me because it's very modifiable to each individual. And then as far as an audiobook, I'm currently listening to Real Change by Sharon Salzberg. She's really a master in the meditation and mindfulness world, and she talks about real life manifestations of mindfulness and how to put it into practice. So I think that she is particularly good to listen to and just a beautiful speaker, beautiful ideas. And then for yoga, if you want a yoga app, the Down Dog app has offered, I don't know if they still do, but they offer healthcare people either free or discounted options. And you can choose the duration and style and level of yoga that you want. So you have really no excuse to you can get in 10 minutes of yoga and you can fine tune it to what you're looking for and just get started. If you get started, you're on the right track, you're on the road.
I always tell everybody that's the hardest thing to do is just begin something. And if you stop worrying about, well, how am I going to do this, 5 months from now, or how am I going to do an hour a day? Start with just like you just said, have the beginner's mindset. Let's tie that back into what you said at the very top of the podcast and keep that healthy beginner's mindset. This was a wonderful conversation. Thank you, David, and thank you, Dr. Samaan, for your wonderful insights to health and wellness. Any last words from either of you?
I'll just leave you with one more thought, and that is to make some time in your life for a creative practice, whether it's going out with your camera, writing in your journal, dancing, singing, or anything else. Finding your creative side is going to feed your soul and enhance your well-being and probably make you happier.
So true. I couldn't agree with you more on that one. That's great. Yes, creative life.
Thank you so much for your insights. That was wonderful.
Yeah. Thank you both.
Thank you. I really enjoyed meeting you both.
Thanks for listening to this episode. TechLink Health is a healthcare advisory platform for consumers and organizations to stay informed with the latest insights while connecting with healthcare experts for telehealth, e-consults, and consulting services. For more details, visit www.techlink.health.